Do you feel like the opportunity for homeownership is running away from you faster than you can even think? Well, today's episode is going to help break down whether or not you should buy a home or rent. Welcome, new and returning Money Buddies. I'm your host, Skylar Fleming, and if I had a penny for every time someone told me that their main financial stressor is whether or not they'll be able to afford a home, well, to be honest, I would be able to afford a home. Today's topic is the number one thing on the minds of fellow young adults. We all feel like homeownership is this high-speed train and we showed up late to the station. It feels like something that we're never going to be able to attain. And while I'm not going to say one way or the other whether it'll be possible or not for you, I'm going to help you in today's episode feel confident in the decision that you need to make whether you're going to buy a home or rent. And I promise that after you leave today's episode, you're going to feel so much more confident in whichever decision you make. And you're going to feel confident knowing that it's the right one for you. I have helped so many people talk through this very topic, and I know it's not black or white, and there's a lot of gray area in the middle on the decision to rent or buy. So I'm extremely excited to help all of you listening today by talking about what I've heard from so many other people, doing a ton of research for this episode, and applying it here so that we can all have a clear path on our decision to buy or rent. But today's episode, we're going to tackle both sides of that equation. So let's get into today's episode because it's going to be a phenomenal one. You've maybe heard of the idea rent and invest the difference, but how do you actually do that? Well, at the end of today's episode, I'm going to detail exactly where to invest the difference and how to set this up for yourself. But we're going to start out today's episode with this first article here titled "Renting is Increasingly More Affordable Than Buying," and it's from Bankrate. The first quote I want to share here says, on average, renting a home is cheaper than paying a mortgage in all 50 of the largest U.S. metros in 2025. With the cost difference between the two growing in 38 of the metros since last year. I know that everybody is going to say that there's more to owning a home than just the price of the two options, right? There's more than just the financial ramifications. But I do feel that it's extremely important to know that renting is cheaper than paying a mortgage. While I come down strongly on the side of looking at the financial side of the situation, I do feel like a majority of people come down strongly on looking at the non-financial factors a little bit more. This next quote here says, renting allows for more flexibility and lower upfront costs. Without a down payment or closing costs, more people are able to keep cash on hand and invest what you'd be putting towards a house into the stock market. One of the biggest things in favor of renting, in my opinion, is that flexibility and the lower upfront cost. Flexibility is a non-financial factor, and it can have a huge impact on your living situation. I also think that people forget that there's so many more costs to owning a home than just that monthly payment going to the bank. Our next quote here about mortgages says, high mortgage and home prices combined with limited housing inventory have created a high barrier of entry for aspiring homeowners. Rising property taxes and homeowners insurance rates are also straining homeowners' budgets. And at the same time, rents have experienced a slowdown due to growth and rental inventory increasing, which gives renters more options to choose from. And the limited housing inventory has a huge impact on increasing home prices. But then everything else surrounding the home is also becoming more expensive. That's just something to consider. Things like insurances, taxes, and maintenance are all going up as well as the home price. This next quote from the article says the study did not factor in some of the tangential benefits associated with renting or owning, such as equity in the home or the freedom that renters have to move and avoiding costly home repairs, but each option comes with its own lifestyle and financial trade-offs that should be considered. And this is the point that I want to really hit on, is to make sure you consider the lifestyle and non-financial trade-offs as well as you're making this decision. If you're a young adult who wants flexibility and let your career take you wherever it's going to go, then buying a home in a city that you just moved to might not be the right situation. But if you're a young adult who just got married or you have a family, you have a career that you could see yourself working in for a long time and you think you're really ready to settle down, then buying a home may be the good option there. The real thing that I want to stress is the gray area in between. It may be great to rent for a year or two or three and then buy a home. That's what I want to leave on the table as one of the biggest takeaways that I've had while putting together this episode is that you don't have to do one or the other forever. You could buy a home right now and then in 7 to 10 years or whenever it might be, switch back to renting because that's the more affordable option financially and maybe it's better for your lifestyle at that point. Because the thing that I see and what I feel is that so often homeownership is seen as this one-stop shop and the only right way for people to live in America. But the main thing to remember is that renting is cheaper in pretty much every major area in the country right now. But cheaper doesn't automatically mean better, and more expensive doesn't automatically mean wrong. What actually matters is whether you're in the right position to buy, and that's what our next article is going to help us figure out. Title of this article is Rent versus Buy. Should I rent or buy a home? It's from Fidelity. First quote says, are you truly in a financial position to buy? If buying overstretches your finances, you might be less able to cope with a financial emergency or save for other important goals like retirement. Plus, an inadequate down payment or a subpar credit score might leave you at a big disadvantage if you're trying to get an offer accepted in today's market. And this is a pretty big one in my mind. I feel like a lot of people feel like they have to do whatever it takes to get into a home because of this magical idea of home equity. But if you stretch yourself too thin, you might put yourself in a really bad situation that you don't want to find yourself in. If you're ready to purchase a home, you really need to consider what would you do in other situations like a financial emergency, or how are your other goals like retirement going to fare, or maybe saving for a vacation. If you have to set every other financial priority aside in order to buy a home, then you may be overstretching yourself. And you might have to consider if you're truly in the right financial position to buy, or if it's just this nagging desire that you feel like you have to buy a home. Because this next quote is incredible and I love it. So consider this one. Would you still buy a home if your home's value doesn't rise? This is incredible. Are you wanting to buy a home just because you hear it reported as this great way to build equity and an investment? Then I think you might be purchasing a home for the wrong reason. Ask yourself this question to get a sense of what your response is. Would you still want to buy a home if the home's value doesn't rise? Would your home still be of value to you in 5 to 10 years if the price stays relatively the same and doesn't increase? You can really use this question as a way to understand what you're actually looking for. If you want your home's value to increase, and that's going to be the only way that your home is valuable to you, then you may want to just look at investing your money instead of forcing a home purchase in order to invest. There are other asset classes with proven track records of growth that you can invest your money in besides the monumental purchase of a home. And I'm going to teach you exactly how to do this later in the episode and consider the idea of rent and invest the difference. So make sure you stick around for that because I'm going to walk you through exactly what you need to do. This next quote really plays off of that last one, and it asks you to consider, what does your heart say about renting versus buying? How do you feel about it? Do you feel like renting is just throwing money away? Do you buy into the idea that you're paying someone else's mortgage? Do you feel like you're going to be somewhere for a long time and want to own the place that you're sleeping at night? When you think about buying, do you feel like it's a forced decision? Do you feel like buying a home is something that everybody else is telling you that you need to do? Do you feel like buying a home is going to completely derail your other goals and plans that you have for your money? Deep down, I think you know if you're pushing yourself for an option that isn't best for you. You might be pushing yourself towards renting just because it's a bit financially cheaper, but it's not the right decision for you. Or you might be pushing yourself into a home purchase, which is the more likely scenario, even though renting is a better option for you and your family potentially. Like I mentioned earlier, I feel like homeownership is so often painted as this one-stop shop for the American dream. And so often we don't actually look at the actual cost of buying a home. We just figure it is a goal that we all have to do at some point, a rite of passage, so to speak. So for all of those of you young adults out there who are sitting there telling yourself that you have to buy a home, take a deep breath. It's okay. You don't have to do it right now. You can do it in 3, 4, 5 years or more, and it will all be okay. But make sure you're taking these questions that the articles are asking and talking about them, and be honest when you're answering them. Because once you've done an honest gut check, the next step is going to help you build a real path and figure out what it looks like in real life. This next article does a great job laying out the different things to consider in plain terms. The article's titled, Should You Buy a Home or Rent in 2025? So I got 4 different things to consider for each option. When you're renting, consider these things in your mind. Not sure where you want to live long term. You don't want the hassle of maintenance. You want lower monthly payments. and you're willing to invest the cash instead of having to build equity. Number 1 and number 4 for me are the biggest factors. If you're not sure where you want to live long term, then renting is easy and kind of the obvious decision. And especially if you're willing to invest the cash instead of considering your home to be your investment, then renting is also a fantastic option. But next, let's talk about the case for buying a home. Maybe you're considering staying somewhere for at least 3 years, probably more like 5 or 7 years. You want full control over your living space. You don't need to tap into investments for a down payment. And you want an asset with a track record of appreciation. I really want to emphasize number 3. Do you have enough money that you don't need to tap all of your investments or your retirement accounts in order to get a down payment? I know that first-time homebuyer programs exist and they allow you to tap different retirement accounts to get money, but can you get into a home without having to do that? While I'm not going to come out and flat out object to potentially using these first-time homebuyer programs, I want you to stop and think about whether or not you can do it without using these programs, because that may be a sign that you're stretching yourself a little too thin. The other points in that last quote are fantastic reasons to consider buying a home. If you want full control over your living space and where you put things. And also, I can't lie and say that homeownership doesn't lead to appreciation and equity that you can use later in your life. It's certainly something that you can't ignore. And for a lot of people, that's the way that they save for retirement and the way they actually get some forced savings into an investment asset class. But this next article is going to walk you through some exact numbers and why buying a home can feel like this thing that's forced, even though it may be really scary and it's a large decision, but we need to come to grips that it isn't required for everyone. And the article is going to start out with a little bit of a story about the author trying to squeeze into their home, even though it would be a little bit crazy. And it opens up with a quote from their real estate agent. This next article is from Money with Katie, and it opens up with the quote from the real estate agent saying, "So with this place, you'd be a little over budget, but your mortgage payment would probably be around $1,200. Then you can assume about $420 per month in property taxes and another $100 or so in insurance. And you'll need just about $10,000 at closing." Now, the author says the numbers swirled around and collided in my mind. And then she said, "Wait, I'd be putting down $25,000. The real estate agent replied, "I know. The $10,000 is additional. It's for your closing costs." Now, I want you to take a second and realize that. Ponder how monumental this purchase can be, and then consider an extra $10,000 fee that's not even included in your down payment and doesn't go towards that equity. Take a second now and think about the last time you went to purchase something when there was a fee tacked on at the end, and were you okay with it? How much was the fee? If the fee was something like $5 or $10 or maybe $50, you might have said, "Okay, I'm still going to make the purchase." Now imagine yourself in a situation where you're already trying to stretch thin and you're going over budget on your monthly payments. And then on top of the monthly payment stretching you thin, you're trying to figure out how in the world to get a $25,000 down payment. And then boom, you're tacked on with a $10,000 fee, where in the first place you weren't even sure how you were going to get $25,000. If that causes you to wince and cringe a little bit and feel a pain in your wallet, then that might be a sign that buying a home is a little too large of an expense for you right now. And I know you're probably telling yourself that you want to get into a home so that you can build equity. And if that's the reason, make sure you stick around for the end of the episode so you can learn how to rent and invest the difference. But a couple more quotes here to share from the article. The next one says, "Buying a home in the US is culturally sacrosanct, which makes it difficult to see the decision clearly." This is my favorite quote from the entire article. Buying a home is something that everybody feels like is a rite of passage, which makes it hard to really think through the decision properly because there is so much more that goes into it than just comparing monthly payments. This next quote says that renting, of course, will always be seen as a net loss of funds through that lens of a home purchase building equity. But one can offset that by investing the monthly difference into something like the stock market. It's worth calling this out explicitly because while we all tend to agree that renting is sheerly an expense that won't bear any financial fruit, we don't tend to think of home ownership in the same way. The assumption is that owning a home under almost any circumstance will be financially beneficial, which leads us to downplay and ignore the costs that we will incur along the way because we just assume it's going to be beneficial. To me, making the assumption that owning a home under almost any circumstance will be financially beneficial downplays the extra upfront costs, and it downplays the long-term costs and property taxes because once your mortgage is paid off, those payments don't go away. There continues to be taxes. There continues to be maintenance. All those other things still continue and they will continue to cost you money. And this next quote helps us think about buying a home But how do you know if you can afford to buy a home? Comfortably affording a home means that there's room in your budget for the higher monthly payment and room for those upfront costs to be saved so that you can actually pay them. If you have to go and get multiple different loans from relatives or different banks, it's a sign you can't comfortably afford the home. Figure out what your new mortgage payment will be, and then include that and everything else in the cost and start budgeting and living like you own the home. For example, let's say your rent is $1,600, but your mortgage payment you're trying to get into is $2,900. For simplicity, let's say that includes everything like taxes and whatnot. So starting next month, budget your rent category to be $2,900 and see how it feels by the end of your budget and by the end of the month. If that feels extremely stressful, then you may need to take a step back and realize that buying a home might not be the right option right now. But this next quote, it's a fantastic one, that if you get going early, you may be able to more easily buy a home later down the road. The quote says, "It might sound counterintuitive, but the best time to begin saving for retirement is technically before any of your other big life milestones. This has less to do with being an overachieving early bird and more to do with understanding how compound interest works." I love this idea. If you can get a lot more money into retirement early and let it grow with that power of compound interest, then you'll be set. A home is a much more short-term purchase, and as you get older and have more money, which people tend to use as a reason to wait to save for retirement, having that higher income can actually be a great way to quickly save up for a down payment. But retirement is a massive purchase that you need to start saving for right now, and you need to make sure that you're using the power of compound interest over your long time in order to actually be able to hit the point that you need to with your retirement savings. I really hope you enjoyed today's research, and I really hope I was able to paint a picture in both directions. I do acknowledge I have a bias towards being pro-renting, but I felt like with all the research today, we were able to cover the spectrum really well. And I want to make sure to emphasize that buying a home is not as simple as a monthly payment, and there's more that goes into that. So make sure you're considering all of the financial and non-financial factors. But up next, we have a fantastic case study where we're going to look at Riley and Jordan and try to figure out if they're stretching themselves too thin or what they need to do to get into a home that they want to purchase together. Let's set the background here for today's case study and introduce Riley and Jordan. They're 27 and 26 respectively. They bring home a combined income of $107,000 per year, roughly $6,800 per month after taxes. They've been renting a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,650 per month over the last 2 years. Their lease is up in 4 months, and their landlord just informed them that thankfully their rent isn't going to increase, so it's going to stay at $1,650. But they are feeling some massive pressure from their family where they're saying, you're basically just paying someone else's mortgage. And Riley and Jordan are seriously considering buying their first home. They've saved $18,000 together, which they're proud of, but they're not sure how far that actually goes in today's housing market. They will casually browse Zillow, and they have their eye on a $280,000 townhome in a suburb nearby. A coworker mentions they should just put down 3% and get into something now. But Riley isn't sure that that's a smart way to go. On top of their mortgage conversation, Riley has $24,000 in student loan. He's contributing 4% to his 401k to get the employer match, which is great. Jordan has $18,000 in student loans and isn't investing at all right now. They don't have money that is specifically set aside as an emergency fund, but they do have that $18,000 in savings, which is doing double duty as their emergency fund and a potential down payment, and they know that's a problem. But they both feel like homeownership and retirement are things that will happen eventually. But right now, both goals feel so far away and overwhelming. Riley's heard the phrase of rent and invest the difference being thrown around by podcasts, but he's not sure what it actually means in practice or how to even apply it. So I want to open up today's case study by using the NerdWallet rent versus buy calculator and using some of their numbers. This tool is fantastic. It is linked in the show notes, and it shows you a chart of where the cost flips for it being better to buy or better to rent. So here are the numbers that I've plugged into the calculator if you want to follow along. I'm going to put up a graphic for the rent versus buy calculator on screen as I'm talking through this, so you can check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. Here are the numbers that I used. Their monthly rent is $1,650. Their security deposit is 1 month of rent. Renter's insurance is $12 a month, and their rent will eventually see an increase of 3% per year. Their purchase price of the home is $280,000. And their down payment is 10% or $28,000. Their loan term is 30 years with an interest rate of 6.75%. And I set their tax filing status as joint. And I said the annual rate of return is 8%. And the break-even point for them is 10 years. If they can guarantee that they're going to live in the home for 10 years or more, then it does say that buying is going to be the right decision financially. But if they're going to be in the location for any less than 10 years, then renting is the cheaper option. One thing that I do want to add is that at year 30, when their mortgage is over, the total difference between the two options is about $40,000 in total cost. So financially, these two decisions are actually pretty close to each other. If their average annual rate of return bumps up to 9% or more, then renting is cheaper over the long term. And that's the financial side of this equation. They need to make sure to consider it, of course, because if they only plan to be here for 3 to 5 years, then renting is going to be the better option for them. But now let's move into some of the behavioral and strategic habits that they need to implement, whether they're going to buy or rent. They need to do something about their emergency fund and make sure that it's separate from their other savings, or else they're really going to stretch themselves too thin. And I really want to touch on a note covering their down payment here. They said they have $18,000 that covers some of their down payment, but that would leave them nothing for closing costs, typically about $6,000 to $9,000 in this case. They wouldn't have anything for moving, and they would be completely out of an emergency fund. So realistically, they would be required to come up front with more money than they actually have. And that's where the main problem lies. They have so many other things they're trying to do, along with buying a home. It makes it all seem impossible, and that's what's so overwhelming. What would they do if they got into a home and then within 1 to 2 years, they had an emergency that they couldn't cover? There's also the opportunity cost of not being able to invest any money now because of the compound interest and having to wait until you have a higher paying job and more room in your budget. There's also the opportunity cost of not having job flexibility. What if they want to change jobs because they get a new manager or they really want to move? That's a huge piece towards renting. But I want to mainly focus on the fact that they don't have an emergency fund if they use their money for a down payment. Because even if they did stretch themselves out to buy a home so that they're going to be there for over 10 years so that it's more affordable financially, the cost breakdown at the beginning of the home is so extremely high that they're probably not going to have any room in their budget to be able to save for an emergency fund for at least a few more years. And that's a lot that they're risking for the first few years of getting into a home. Is it worth only breaking even after 10 years if you have to go 5 years without an emergency fund? The real opportunity for them here is to start playing out what purchasing a home is going to look like in their monthly budget, but don't purchase the home yet. This is a perfect time for them to start building a savings bucket for that actual down payment and home maintenance, taxes, and insurance, and all the other surprise costs that come up. So what's the right call for Riley and Jordan? Well, I think they need to pump the brakes on buying right now. Not because homeownership's off the table forever, but because they're not ready yet. And rushing into this purchase puts them in a really, really fragile financial position from day one. Their $18,000 in savings gets eaten up almost entirely by the down payment and closing costs, and they're sitting in a brand new home with no buffer, no room to breathe, and no emergency fund. That's a stressful way to start a new chapter that's supposed to be exciting and fun. So here's the plan for them, and likely for so many of you that want to consider getting into a home. Start living like you're already in the home. Take that gap between your current rent and your mortgage payment and budget it to start saving it for your emergency fund or to start saving it for a future down payment and all those other costs that are going to surprise you. If you can do this for 12 to 18 months, you're going to know two things. You're going to know whether you can actually afford the lifestyle or whether it feels suffocating. And second, you're going to be confident that you actually have enough to get into a home without stretching yourself dangerously thin. And the other thing to realize is that 10-year break-even point, it should tell you that the decision isn't urgent. A year of preparation is not a year of losing out. It's a year of setting yourself up for success. And I really think this case study today was a fantastic one that allowed us to take a look at such a common scenario from a different perspective. Because when we're trying to make the decision for ourselves, there can be so many emotions at play that make it really hard to make a confident and correct decision. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and today's case study. The real takeaway here is to look at the situation you want to work towards and then start living like you're in that situation now. Make sure you consider all the ramifications of renting and buying both financially and non-financially. Consider how your lifestyle will have to change if you own a home, and consider what you may be gaining or giving up. But I also think you're going to really like today's action item, and I promise I'm going to teach you how to rent and invest the difference next. The one and only action item for today is to evaluate your situation and decide whether you want to rent or buy and start living today like that's your reality and see how it feels in your budget. But now it's time for the thing you've all been waiting for. You've probably heard rent and invest the difference, but how do you actually do that? I'm going to detail exactly where to invest here in just a second, but first, I want you to share this episode with your friend who said they want to buy a home. Let's help everyone make this decision with as much clarity as possible. The friend who just texted you earlier today or you had a conversation with last week that they found a home and they want to buy it right now, send this episode to them. How do you rent and invest the difference? Well, figure out how much home you'd like to be able to stretch to afford with your monthly payment and set that as your baseline for your housing budget. Now subtract your rent from that amount, figure out that difference and put it into your Fidelity or Vanguard account into something like VTI or VOO. Now you're doing the same thing you would be doing if you owned a home. You're putting money into something that's going to build equity, and you're putting that difference of the larger payment into that equity. And over time, there's potential for that to grow so that you can use that as a down payment to buy your home. And then guess what? You're used to that monthly payment every single month. It's such a great way to get yourself set up on the right footing while also building some equity while you're renting. So please, rent and invest the difference if it's the right decision for you. But whether you're trying to do that or you're actually trying to save for a down payment because your first home purchase is on the horizon, I can help you with either one of these options. Let's start working together by sitting down on a call and we'll talk through your situation so that you can decide finally whether buying a house or renting is a good decision for you. And we'll make sure to cover everything that makes your situation unique so that you can be confident and know that it's the right decision. So to take action, head over to the show notes for this episode, and there's going to be a link right at the top for you to schedule a free call with me. And next week, we're going to jump headfirst into spring, and we're going to talk about how to spring clean your finances to get them ready for a summer of fun, full of valuable spending and saving. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Financial Planning for Young Adults. I'm your host, Skylar Fleming. Have a great week. And hey, quick heads up. This podcast, it's meant to be educational and it's for entertainment purposes. It's not personalized financial advice for your specific situation. So before you go out and make any big money moves, make sure you chat with a qualified financial professional who knows your full financial picture.